Welcome to Current Situation, your Palmetto State Political Pulse. I'm your host, Joshua Gale, alongside South Carolina State House Representative Jordan Pace. Every week, our goal is to help you navigate the complex world of politics through biblically conservative perspectives. Before we jump into today's conversation, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Hey, this is Josh from the band Gale, and we're excited to share with you that our newest single called I Still Do comes out on all major streaming platforms on March 14th.
And I still agree with younger me. I do wanna spend my life with you, and I still agree with younger me.
All right, Jordan, last week, a couple things happened that I want to catch up on and ask you about. So a couple topics that we're going to discuss briefly today: DEI, the governor's state of the state address, and the DOGE department that is cutting spending rapidly, and what that kind of tells us about every other area of government on the state level as well as the federal level. So first, let's talk about DEI. You and some other state representatives and government officials sent letters to South Carolina universities demanding what?
Yeah, so we demand that they remove basically all of their DEI funding and spending from their budgets and basically just stop doing this. To kind of walk everybody back to the beginning of the story, in 2023, in March, when we started the budget process in 2023, right before that, we a few of us had requested that all the state universities voluntarily report what they spent on DEI, and we had it basically went through a third party entity within the state to request that, in a way that did not seem hostile, because we wanted the truth. So they self-reported, all these universities, what they spent on DEI. The big spenders were Clemson, USC, MUSC, to the tune of millions of dollars. And then others were basically none. And there were a few that were effectively zero. But what we figured out was, like, there are millions of dollars of taxpayer money being spent on these DEI things. So not only is it a financial issue, but like a practical ramifications of, hey, these policies are inherently bad. I mean, some people might have had good intentions with them, but functionally,
Right.
They produce bad results.
We all want a better workplace, but we also
Yeah.
want to have a job at the end of the day, and that means that we have people in the right positions that know how to do their jobs so that we can be successful as an organization. You can't meet organizational goals without the right people that
Right.
know how to do their job. So what happens,
Competency.
let's say outside competency. So let's say outside of public universities and state-funded universities, things like that. What happens when a company, when a board gets a hold of something that a program within an organization is not working and it's wasting money, and it's actually proven that it's more harmful than helpful? What happens when the board gets a hold of that, or the shareholders get a hold of that?
Yeah. So in the marketplace outside of government, there are market pressures, right? You have to make money or you go out of business. That's kind of the hard reality of being in business, whether you're small family-owned business or a Fortune 500. If you're not making money, you're in trouble. So when they're considering policies like these DEI stuff, many of these big companies have done it for several years for various reasons, either because their shareholders were demanding it or because their leadership thought it was a good idea,
Public
or
persona.
whatever.
Mhm.
The public perception, they thought it would be a positive. But the reality was, what we've seen is it was losing those companies money. And there has been just an onslaught of private businesses that have been slashing this, predominantly major, big Fortune 100, Fortune 500, Target, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, a lot of government contractors, Walmart. Uh, there was, I mean, McDonald's, some of the ones that were just
Starbucks.
way out front, yeah, pushing this stuff, have looked back and said, this is losing us a lot of money. Why? Because we're not promoting and hiring based on merit, but based on skin color or gender or nationality. Basically, all the things you're not supposed to discriminate on, they were discriminating, because DEI inherently follows that um, Ibram Kendi philosophy of the only solution to past discrimination is present discrimination, which is fundamentally wrong. Uh, so many of them have abandoned that. It's many state governments and state government institutions outside of South Carolina have abandoned that. Obviously, President Trump has come in with a flurry of executive orders in this first month of being in office. And that was one of the first was, hey, we're not spending any more money on this in DEI. If you get, he sent an executive order that said, hey, if you're a institution of higher learning and you take federal dollars, that is, Pell Grants, student loans, grants, things like that, you got to knock this off too. So we started this back in 2023, exposing how much money was being spent just in universities. That's not even accounting for like agencies. DHEC was one of the worst, which now is split. But when DHEC was a thing, we had 3 or 4 whistleblowers from within DHEC come to us because they found out we're investigating the stuff on the university level, come to us and tell us horror stories about getting passed over for promotion, getting fired, having to leave because the environment was so toxic because of these policies. So we signed this letter. I think there's about 30 of us, conservative legislators, asking it back in, well, even last year when MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a strong conservative stalwart university up in Massachusetts, I say very tongue-in-cheek, when they dropped their DEI program last year because it was hurting their neurosurgery department, and when the University of Chapel Hill, North Carolina Chapel Hill, dropped theirs last year, they actually not only dropped their DEI program, they took all the funding, $2.5 million or so, or maybe more than that, and moved it to the security department. When they did that, I sent a letter to MUSC's president asking them to do the same thing, like stop, because right now, still to this day, to work at MUSC, to go to school at MUSC, you have to take 8 hours of DEI training, and I've seen their class list, and it is heinous. Wow. Some of the things that our medical providers, medical students are being indoctrinated with. Obviously, you and I know people have gone there and shared that. Like, at best, it's a waste of time that they have to pay for, or at worst, it warps the way they think about people and practice medicine. So on the legislation side,
a letter, if you hear this and this bothers you a little bit, and you want to send a letter to Dr. David Cole, I will put that address for the president of NC's at physical mailing at his office's physical mailing address in the show notes. You got a wonderful staff. I'm sure they will deliver that message. You can also email Cole, COLE, DJ at musc.edu, and that address is 179 Ashley Avenue. Knowing that, government, they can slide under the radar and operate unchecked. And remember, there was a town organization, and I knew a gentleman that I know had developed a leadership program that was basically giving it away. It was praised by Simon Sinek and all sorts of other different people, giving it away. And it was told, and this gentleman had made it a certain way. It was told that it was not in DEI enough. It didn't check enough DEI boxes, and so they were going to go spend quadruple that amount, or some absurd amount to find something that checked all the DEI boxes. Because there's folks that in these programs, and you and I know both historically, the person, and we know, and I have had the fortune of working with government organizations over the past couple of years, and seeing who's running some of these organizations and these departments. The number one benefactor of DEI programs are white women.
Statistically, yeah.
And so, which in my opinion, I understand we're about equality of certain things, but of gender as well. But it's difficult for me to pass the check on that of something that is not really benefiting everyone.
No, it fundamentally does the opposite of what it purports to aim to do. Like what it's saying it wants to do, it does the total opposite in function. And that's what it's proven objectively, not only in universities, but in government and in business. This is why you've seen it being dropped across the board, except in except for Costco and the NFL. Bizarrely, they're holding on to it.
What was MUSC's response to your request?
They said thank you for the letter, and I never heard back from them.
Okay.
That was it. So obviously now they're having to deal with presidential administration change and the executive order that goes with that. I think they'll be singing a different tune. We've also refiled legislation that did pass the House. So after 23, we exposed to that in the budget. It didn't pass. We tried to cut it, but we couldn't get it passed, to cut all that money. But part of the agreement we had with leadership through that effort was they're going to pass a bill in the House, or at least move a bill in the House that wound up passing to rein in some of that on the universities. It never passed the Senate. It didn't even get a subcommittee hearing in the Senate, unfortunately. So we refiled that. There was also a new bill, a DEI bill that was filed, I think Thursday last week, that's going to have a lot of support. I think just about every Republican in the House will be a co-sponsor of it by the end of next week. It's a good start. It's not an end-all be-all. It needs to be stronger from how it's written as far as like having teeth. But it's a good start, and it would apply not only to universities but all state agencies to root that out in a way that's not just, well, this is what we got to ensure in the bill itself, is make sure they can't just change the name, because that's what USC, Columbia, and Clemson, they just changed the name of the DEI office last year. And now they're claiming, oh, we don't spend any money on DEI. But we know how much they're actually spending because they told us 2 years prior. So this is an ongoing effort. But it's a good thing. I mean, this is kind of how the Freedom Caucus is supposed to operate as an institution is we expose stuff, we stake out this claim that's uncomfortable and difficult for some of our colleagues, and we just don't back down. Try our best not to be, get personal about it, just stick to the policy. And eventually everybody moves to that direction. I mean, that's our goal, is to move that over to window,
right?
To get everybody on board.
Now here, it's one thing if it works.
Mm.
It's one thing if it makes a better organizational culture. It's one thing if it does all these different things. Historically, and it's been proven and reported, it has not made an effect or a change. It's actually hindered and hurt, lost money. So why hold on to something? Rip off the Band-Aid, let it go, rather than trying to keep appeasing someone just by saying that we have this program and making up these make-believe jobs that aren't producing anything and wasting our taxpayer money. This is not shareholder money. This is not anything else but taxpayer funded money. So before we go into the State of the State address, let's talk about wasting money.
Yeah.
You and I haven't been exaggerating over 25 episodes about how much money is being wasted. And I've said numerous times before, there's the speed of light, the speed of sound, and the speed of government wasting money.
Yeah.
Now it's being exposed at the national level of how much money is being taxpayer money is being wasted and actually used against us, our own money used against us, and floating these global elites and just all sorts of different things, and programs and news sources and things like that. And it's the same thing happening on a state and local level as well. And in my opinion, that's on us.
Yeah. No, no, you're right. And that's in the same vein of like, if you look in the Old Testament of the Bible, when there's like rampant sin in Israel, where there's usually it's idolatry. Um, the typically the king is bad in leading that effort, but it's not just the king that's held responsible; it's the people in general, because it's the people who acclaim and and ratify the kings when they become kings,
Mm-hmm.
which we see over and over again. So yeah, there's an element there of this is on all of us. The most blatant example, I think, that Doge, or whatever they're calling it now, Elon's crew has exposed, is through USAID, which is the used to be USID, but basically it's a operations fund that distributes American dollars, either taxed or borrowed, which is a whole separate problem that we spend way too much money, more than we bring in, which is again wildly unbiblical. But it hands it out for largely nefarious purposes. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce like trans comic books in Peru, and
Dance parties.
LBG, yeah, like
dance festival, a transgender
dance
festival.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and third world countries and stuff like
Bangladesh.
that.
Yep.
I mean, those are the ones that got the most press, but it goes way beyond that. It's
Right.
largely these, not just those are like tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
These very obviously bad things. Millions to hundreds of millions of dollars has been funneled into non-government organizations in countries like Georgia, the country of Georgia, in places like that. Kind of the periphery of Ukraine and stuff like that goes directly into the pockets of really bad people, essentially, that the United States is bribing to be on our side. And some of that I just found out today, some of that like pro LGBTQ plus stuff funding that went from USAID to Georgia, the country, was actually pocketed by one of those oligarchs and spent on like jewelry, and he actually sent two of his daughters using that money to private school in the United States.
Wow.
So like it's beyond just the bad implications of what they're doing. It's also just rampant corruption. It's fueling rampant corruption.
Let's call it what most people have heard it called, USAID. So it sounds like a non-profit organization, but it's a front organization.
Oh yeah.
That is not aid. It's literally just spending your taxpayer money.
Yeah.
And illicitly on ridiculous things. And so, what news sources are we funding that we thought were just?
It was like $8 million a year going to Politico, the left-wing, internet news, political news website. Christianity Today got like over $2 million to push the left-wing propaganda.
Yep.
And this isn't just conspiracy, like, oh, are they actually pushing them to push left-wing news?
Right.
They had explicit documentation of kind of blacklisted news subjects and news websites that recipients of this money could not refer to or use.
Right.
I mean,
remember,
very explicit.
Let's go back in time. Christianity Today would attack people who would not shut down their churches during the COVID pandemic, who would attack people on different platforms and all sorts of different things, and became a very...
They were telling people they weren't loving the neighbor because they weren't getting the shots.
Yeah.
Because they had a moral conviction against the development of these things from aborted fetal cells.
Yep.
I mean, that's the kind of, it was literally government propaganda. Another like $160 million went to a think tank it was basically a neocon think tank that Lindsey Graham is a director for. And I mean, it's $160 million. So that's a tremendous amount of money.
We don't have enough time to get into Lindsey Graham.
Oh yeah. I mean, I found a video somebody sent to me a few years ago of Senator Lindsey Graham congratulating USAID on their birthday and what a great job they're doing around the world. This is like 2 years ago. Now all of a sudden it's changed his tune, but at the time he was. I mean, his organizations were getting hundreds of millions of dollars from this entity.
He's great at changing his tune.
He's good at it.
Talk about Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's now that natural resources that we need to protect that are under the soil there and under the ground, but it was about protecting democracy.
Yeah,
then we canceled elections.
Right. The current president of Ukraine canceled the elections when his term ran out, and has just been ruling ever since.
Yeah.
So it can't be about democracy anymore. But that's the kind of part and parcel of effectively USAID has been the front of the U.S. kind of global empire. What it's morphed into, what started as something for good, to combat the USSR and push back against that, has been, warped essentially by greed and power.
Yeah.
The same thing. It's the same story as any over big government. Inevitably, it's greed and power.
Yeah.
That corrupt stuff, and it's our money. And then, so these are the people we vote for to go take care of our money. On a state level, there's a few less zeros in the equation,
right?
But in our state budget, earmarks are the same kind of trouble. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars going to wildly unaccountable and frankly stupid uses of our tax money, when we have the highest income tax rate in the South. We're funding $900,000 to start a football podcast and $1 million to the Greenville Zoo to upgrade their petting zoo area, the farmyard. Crazy stuff like that. And in years past, there was like hundreds of thousands of dollars going to a corn museum, like a town museum for Nieces, South Carolina, with 320 people in it, $400,000. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about at length this coming March when the budget debates start up.
Right.
And this is, I think, a great time to do that, for sunshine to come forth and show up and show off all of this stuff that's being spent federally and statewide and wasted.
But it has to come with pressure from constituents on their elected
Absolutely.
officials to say, I'm watching you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching you. Hey, look what Elon's doing nationally and what Trump's administration is doing. What are you doing? How are we cutting here on a state level? If there's that much corruption nationally, it exists here.
Yeah. And there's a resolution that got proposed last week, a joint resolution to create effectively a South Carolina like Doge commission. I forgot, it starts with a C, CFOJ or something like that. And it made up of 3 House members and 3 senators. Well, the issue with that is that, what Elon's doing with Doge isn't government. These are like 20 to 25-year-old college graduate volunteers, essentially,
right.
Putting their acumen to use,
right,
to dig through this stuff. It's not individuals who voted for these budgets, who have had ample opportunity in years past to join us in exposing this stuff and vote against the stuff. So if we pass that commission, like to create it, what are the chances of members like me who voted against budgets being on there versus the ones who are good soldiers and do what they're told and vote for the budgets being on there?
Right. It's like hiring your own audit. Well, we hired an audit, but it was our audit agency that we hired out in New York City. Or
it's a little the fox guarding the hen house in a chicken costume.
Yeah. So, we got an autopsy, but it's our family physician. So we've covered that. It's really important. We just can't say it enough to put pressure on your elected officials. They don't get reelected without your support and without us trying to expose certain things. Let's expose as much as we can this year. This is a year of exposing, and we're seeing it happen and happen and happen and happen and happen. Let's rip the Band-Aid off, and allow ourselves to heal, but we have to expose what wounds we have been covering up for years that are under greenbacks. And so let's pull on those threads. Let's talk about your response to the governor's State of the State address.
Mm-hmm. So for those who don't know, maybe are more familiar with the presidential State of the Union address yearly. The governor does one of those every year too, called State of the State. And he'll kind of lay out what he wants to do and what his vision is for the state for the next year. There was some good things in there. I've talked about eliminating the income tax. That's a new thing, and I'm grateful for it. It's the first bill I ever filed was eliminate the income tax, so I'm glad we're moving that direction, at least rhetorically. There wasn't any talk of cutting spending, which was a bit concerning. If we're going to eliminate the income tax, we also have to cut spending.
Correct.
Talked about a few good things. School choice, vaguely. Cutting red tape, vaguely. Good stuff. Unfortunately, I mean, when it comes to actual core government functions, wasn't great. He only proposed like $100 million to fix our roads and bridges that are in desperate need. I think last year we put $200 million into that effort, and I try to make 250 because to me, fixing roads and bridges is one of the top two things the state's supposed to do, and we're not good at it because we're too busy giving out awards for gummy bear statues and tax credits to Hollywood producers for woke films and such. The governor was also weirdly, and has been for years, obsessed with electric vehicles, which is not the trend nationally now. I think Trump's been revoking those incentives left and right. I saw yesterday they put a total stop on federal funding for creating new charge points around the country.
We've created eight. Yeah, with I think it's like a budget of $80 billion.
Right, billions of dollars, and they've made 8. So that plug has been pulled, full pun intended. But the governor still seems to be totally committed to electric vehicle production in South Carolina, which to me is very silly, and I'm kind of concerned about that. Yeah. And honestly, the biggest, most concerning thing in the speech was just a total lack of discussion about the thousands of babies that are still being killed in the womb in this state. Both in clinics and at home. I know a tremendous amount since we passed the heartbeat bill. Tremendous amount of those abortions are now being done at home via pills, like mostly mail ordered, or say mostly, many of which are ordered through the mail. And these women have zero medical supervision. The FDA doesn't keep stats, but the European Union does with these same drugs. And according to the European Union, the UK, when women take these drugs, there's like a 1 in 4 chance, according to their data, that the woman winds up in the hospital. So not only does it kill the baby, it puts them in the hospital for various reasons. And a couple of the Kamala Harris's talking points toward the end of the election, she talked about a lady in Georgia that died from abortion complication. It's because she took the pills and all of the baby didn't come out. So she got sepsis and they didn't catch it in time and she died.
Yeah. And
that was something like 1 in 16, according to those European stats. 1 in 16 women who take the pills either have permanent, like some sort of permanent medical issue, or die. So it's pretty heinous stuff, and they're just mailing. So there's no talk.
The FDA is just not following up on it, and not.
Well, the FDA has approved their use for, I think, up to 8 weeks, but women are getting in and taking them much later than 8 weeks, and and they're also getting them from out of state. Technically, in South Carolina, it's illegal to get these drugs in the mail. You have to get them in person with an in-person doctor's visit from a licensed physician in South Carolina.
Right. So we used to remove people's medical license for trying to give out ivermectin or any other kind of drug that was proven to work on certain things. Mm-hmm. Very little side effects and only for certain people who had certain genetic disposition. But yet people are just mailing drugs around with 1 out of 8 and 1 out of 16 and all sorts of different complications and results of death.
And there's organizations in South Carolina that have received state tax dollars that are promoting this. I mean, they're essentially facilitating the distribution of these drugs. They'll order them from out of state and then provide them basically under the counter. I think that's illegal. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a prosecutor, but I wish our prosecutors, our solicitors, and attorney general, and I've urged them to do so informally, just to look into this stuff and
Yeah.
go find this stuff out and track it. If Live Action and James O'Keefe and Steven Crowder, like if they can go in and catch them on film doing this, why
Yeah.
can't our solicitors and our AG do it?
Right. Because we've shut down certain
should.
departments.
Well, honestly, at the end of the day, it's up to. I mean, they're the elected officials
Here we
elected
go.
to do the job.
Let's get rid of DEI programs and save millions and millions of dollars a year. Put that funding over in to stop all sorts of things like drugs that are killing women and children, and sex trafficking and child labor that still exists here in the United States. Let's go expose all of those things and put funding behind that and the cartels that exist here in South Carolina on the Grand Strand and here in Charleston. Let's put our funding into that and not some of these DEI programs. So,
well, that goes back to the greater point of what's the government's main jobs: to deliver justice, both criminally and civilly. So, criminal justice and enforce contracts on the civil level,
right,
and facilitate infrastructure. I mean, that's our main two jobs as a state, and we don't do them well because we're spread out doing everything else. We're regulating everybody. We're regulating all these businesses to death. We're spending money on, like I said, film incentives and gummy bear statues and podcasts and orangutan exhibits. And the main thing isn't the main thing because we're spread out doing everything else.
Right.
Until we get back to the main things being the main things, we're going to continue in all this right, flailing around, not doing our jobs.
Right. Let's not be fooled by the smoke and mirrors that tend to come out every several years, depending on who's in office, that says, hey, we're going to appease you and we're going to make it look like things are going to be better. But it's really just smoke and mirrors, and there's nothing, no substance to it. We got to stick to our guns here and really try to make something that, again, is not an economy that our children inherit, that is in shambles, that China's calling us on our debt. And I was explaining to somebody else how tariffs work. And we've been able to eliminate the national debt before. It was a very long time ago, but we were able to do it using that too. So there's a plan. It takes ripping the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good, but we have to tell the instant gratification part of the human nature to sit this one out so that we can have something better in the long term.
And it's working in Argentina. That's the craziest part about all this. It's like we have a model in South America of this on a smaller scale that is exactly what we need to be doing and what Javier Milei's been doing in Argentina. And it's working. It's very obviously working.
Right.
But
yeah. And that's talk about a place that does not trust the government or the church. But there's something that's said about what's going on there. Well, Jordan, any other final words about what kind of is on the horizon in the coming weeks?
Yeah, look for school choice debates going to be coming up in the next several weeks. What does that look like? ESAs versus tax credits, maybe both, maybe, I don't know. I mean, that thing's whole wide open. So that's coming up. Closed primaries is stuck again. So for the 19th year in a row, it's been filed and seems to be stuck. There's going to be seems to be some kind of movement on tort reform. I know we talked about the insurance crisis we've been having. There's a lot of stuff that just seems to be stalled. But it looks like the next thing up really of substance is going to be school choice in some form or fashion. And then obviously the budget week's coming up, second week in March. And that'll be talking about sunshine and exposure. That'll be a good week for that.
Awesome. So hold on, homeschool parents. There may be something for you in all of that. But anyways, we appreciate everybody tuning in to the Current Situation podcast. Look for some of the details on this in the show notes, and we look forward to sharing more with you in the coming weeks.